Hi, welcome to the Galaxy Glimpse. Today I came with very interesting story. The deep listening array sat high in the Chilean desert, where the air was thin and the night was wide. Dr. Elena Ward liked that the stars here felt close enough to touch, even on days when sleep felt far away. At 3:41 a.m., her monitor twitched, a thin spike rising from the soft floor of cosmic noise. It was too neat to be random and too patient to be a glitch. She leaned forward, took off her glasses, and listened. A soft tone came through the speakers, then a breath. Then a second tone shifted slightly lower. Her cursor hovered, a small hand over a small question. She flagged the file and let the recorder loop. 11 minutes later, the tone returned. Exactly the same shape. Her chest tightened. Patterns make promises that chaos does not. She ran a fast filter, cut the hiss, held the core, and the signal unfolded like a map. There were coordinates hidden in the hum. A string that pointed not to a star but to a shell in Earth's sky. Geostationary altitude above the Pacific, a place where nothing official lived. She checked the satellite catalog anyway. Nothing there, nothing planned, nothing forgotten, only empty sky. She checked the timestamp coded inside the bits, then checked it again. Then a third time for the part of her that did not want to believe. The message said it came from January 19, 2124, 68 years ahead of the clock on her wall. She laughed once because the body does odd things when it meets the impossible. Then the speaker gave her a single human word, faint but clear enough to cut. Prepare. By morning, the room had changed. Screens multiplied, chairs filled. Badges with different colors stood behind her chair. They asked her if she had injected metadata. They asked her if the array had drifted. They asked her if she had slept. She answered no, not really. They listened to the loop with the lights down. 11 minutes. Then the tone came like a knock on glass. The coordinates again, then the word again, prepare. A man in a gray suit said the word sounds like theater. Elena replied that fear often sounds like theater until it does not. They pointed another dish, then another. The knock kept coming. Patient as a tide, the second night the signal split. Two tones stacked like a heartbeat with a shadow. The stack carried a human rhythm. 68 beats and a pause. 68 beats and a pause. A metronome for a future date. When the tone softened, there was a whisper curled under it. Distorted but with human edges, too late, it said. Or maybe that was only the part of Elena that heard what she feared. She ran a voice print match because she had to know which fear was true. The system said the whisper's signature matched her own throat. She stared at the screen until the colors turned to fog, and she whispered to no one. How could I speak from a place I have not reached? The third night the knock grew louder without growing brighter, as if confidence itself had weight. The coordinates shifted 40 kilometers east, then west, then back to the empty point like a pendulum measuring patience. At dawn, a second array in Australia confirmed the same clock, the same knock, the same word like a small knife, prepare. They launched a fast balloon with a recorder package to the altitude printed in the hum. The balloon rose into blue so deep it felt like a secret. At 90,000 feet, the recorder caught wind and a thin ringing like ice. At 110,000 feet, the ringing changed shape and folded into a whisper Elena knew she would dream about for the rest of her life. Don't try to answer, the whisper said. And again the voice match put her name at the edge of the wave. She closed her eyes and pressed her thumb into the desk until pain made a clean room inside the noise. If the future was calling, it was calling with her mouth. They pulled tapes from older nights because hindsight is a greedy thing. 2 weeks back there was nothing. 3 weeks back there was a cough of static with a slope she could now recognize. The world is always full of quiet beginnings we step over on the way to the loud parts. She wrote that line in her notebook because poems sometimes hold a truth when math is not yet ready. On the fourth night she stood outside between dishes that looked like white flowers turned toward a dark sun. The wind tasted like metal and dawn. The Andes held the stars like a bowl. Her phone vibrated with a single text from the lab. The tone had added a line of digits. She walked back fast. The room smelled like coffee and decisions. The digits were not random. They were her birth date and latitude, and a number she did not recognize. A man in a blue badge said it looked like a death date, his voice trying to be gentle without becoming pity. Elena said, "We do not know that," and then she wrote the number anyway. Because we are archivists even when we are afraid. When the loop came around again, the tone was softer, as if it had stepped closer to the microphone on the other side of time. The word changed, not prepare this time, but continue, a choice or an order, a plea or a machine's echo, she could not tell. She looked at the clock on the wall and thought of the millions of clocks on millions of walls, each waiting to be told what time it really is. Then she looked at the sky, and for the first time in her working life, she did not know whether the right answer was to listen harder or to listen less. The signal spread like a rumor you can measure. Jodrell Bank heard it. Arecibo's ghost heard it in archived hum. Canberra heard it. Dishes on rooftops with homemade software heard it. Every 11 minutes, the Earth felt slightly less alone and slightly less safe. NASA took the lead because someone had to be blamed later. They called the ad hoc group the Mirror Working Group, because names make boxes and boxes make fear smaller. The waveforms from 5 continents were synchronized on a wall that looked like a slow ocean of red light. When they layered them, something simple and terrible appeared. The composite looked like Earth's magnetic field, but inside out, a negative of a familiar photograph. An inverted surge wrapped the planet like a second skin, predicted to flare in 68 years. A pale engineer with steady hands said the word geomagnetic collapse and then stopped speaking, because even saying it made the air too thin. Elena stood in the back and watched the maps move. The lines pulsed in a rhythm that felt suspiciously like breath. Prepare had become continue in half the loops. The other half whispered what sounded like don't. The argument in the room split along that seam. The doers and the doubters, the senders and the listeners. A senior said, "If the future speaks, we should answer." Elena said, "If the future speaks." Maybe it is because we answered. Time is not a straight river, someone said. Time is a lake with stones thrown from both shores. The ripples find each other whether you meant them to or not. They voted to run a controlled reply at trivial power and harmless frequency. Because humans cannot hold their breath forever, they prepared a string that said acknowledge in 6 languages and in math. The dish turned slowly, as if embarrassed by what it was about to do. At the scheduled minute, the dish spoke for us. A whisper into a wind we did not understand, the knock did not reply. Instead, the power meters on 3 continents rose without wires, and the lights in 2 cities flickered in a way no electrical engineer could satisfactorily curse. On Elena's monitor, a new line of digits appeared under the coordinates like a smile you do not trust. The digits were the exact power settings and frequency offsets they had just used. Reversed and amplified, the past had been taught by the future how to hurt itself. In the cafeteria that night, everyone talked quietly because loud voices break fragile things like courage. Elena sat with a notebook and wrote small. The way children write when they copy a prayer, she wrote, "If we are a mirror, who is standing in front of us and what room are we reflecting?" She drew the Earth's field as a nest and the inverted field as a hand, then crossed both out because pictures can lie more beautifully than numbers. When she went back to the floor, a colleague pointed at a small curl inside the spectrum like a comma, after a long sentence. They had ignored it under the big tones, but now it felt like an eye looking back. The curl held modulation that was almost speech. The software chewed and gave them a thin thread of human syllables arranged by mercy, more than by certainty. The word said, "We are you," and then a longer chain that fell apart into rain. She wanted to be relieved and was not. If a storm says it is also rain, you do not clap, you look for higher ground. A week later, the array in Nevada, the one that was not supposed to exist, joined the net. Its data came through a channel Elena could not see until a man with a different badge typed a word she did not know, and a door opened in the server like a secret in a book. The Nevada dish had been listening to something else for a long time, buried in the static of lightning and planes and television. Hidden under human noise was a fainter twin of the knock, arriving not from geostationary altitude but from ground level. The coordinates pointed to the desert itself, gravel and heat and a concrete box that liked not being found. The twin tone came 4 seconds after the sky tone, as if the ground were the echo that forgot to act like an echo. The twin tone carried words that did not modulate so much as arrange. "Do not build the mirror," it said, and then, "We already did." Elena stood outside the bunker at sunset and thought about how the desert collects secrets in shallow bowls. A hawk turned over heat with its wings, and the sand decided which footprints to keep. She put her hand on the concrete and could feel nothing but a story anyway. Inside, a machine older than her patience hummed. Its tape heads knew, its memory older than her mother. The machine had been fed the knock for months before her dish in Chile had learned the shape of it. Someone had expected time to forget and had planned an argument with forgetting. She wanted to know who, and she did not want to know, and both wanting made her tired in a way sleep does not fix. That night the knock arrived almost kind. The word was not prepare. Not continue, not don't. The word was remember. It felt less like an order and more like a hand on a shoulder. She wrote it down anyway, because archivists write everything down even when the ink stings. They opened a room that did not like to be opened. It smelled like cold dust and old ozone, the way basements of important buildings often do. Rows of tape and discs and paper more honest than screens sat waiting for a mouth to ask them a question. The Nevada station had a librarian. A woman with silver hair tied like a decision, she said. I retire next month. I hoped I would put this to bed before I put myself to bed. She handed Elena a file with a thin red thread around it, because threads keep promises in some countries. The file said Project Janus, and the dates on the spine were older than Elena and newer than truth. Inside there was a memo with a coffee ring that said, in the event of a geomagnetic inversion, prepare to seed the past with instructions. Underlined twice was the line, do not allow recursion. A note in the margin in different handwriting said, you cannot tell a river not to reflect the moon. Deeper in the file was a transcript that did not have a tape to be its parent. It had Elena's name printed in a place that made her ribs feel like doors. Ward Elena consultation, day 3, future channel preliminary. She did not remember giving a consultation to a machine that had not existed yesterday. The words credited to her were both hers and not hers. Do not answer a siren by singing. The transcript had her saying, you will make a duet that drowns ships. She closed the folder because sometimes closing is the only move left that feels like control. The librarian led them to a rack that hummed like a choir below hearing. Inside were drives with no labels and a screen that preferred black when it warmed. A menu offered 4 choices that felt like the bones of the problem. Listen, answer, record, forget. Elena chose listen because identity is a habit. On the speaker, the knock came without the sky around it, naked and suddenly sad. Under it was a slow human breath that did not line up with any person in the room. Under that was a word that scratched softly, like a pen on hospital paper. We failed, the voice said, then a longer string. We built the array that ate the field that fed the storm that broke the sky. She looked at the others and they looked at her because her mouth had said the words in the file, and might say them again without permission. They chose record because curiosity has better press than fear. The machine asked, what would you place in a bottle for yourself to find? Elena said, I would put a map that shows the harbor from the sea, so the ship knows what shape it is trying not to hit. She surprised herself, then wrote the line down, because some sentences feel like they were written elsewhere and sent through the hand. The librarian chose forget, and the machine went quiet in a way that made them all uncomfortable. Then the lights flickered, and a generator far away cleared its throat. When the screen returned, the menu had only 2 choices. Listen and continue. She did not press either. Sometimes restraint is the bravest math. Above ground, the global group argued about public statements and private products. If you tell the world that the future has called collect, you must also tell the world who pays the charges. They crafted a careful sentence that said long-term solar variability may necessitate infrastructure hardening over the next century. It was true and also not what needed saying, and also the only sentence they could agree on. Truth is often a compromise between what is and what will be tolerated. That night, Elena drove out beyond the last antenna to where the sand looks most like the ocean. She lay on the hood and let the sky do its steady work of making her feel both large and small. She said aloud to the nothing that is always listening, I hear you, I just do not know how to be wiser than my fear. The wind answered in the way wind does, by moving what is loose and leaving what is rooted to think about it. At 2:19 a.m., her phone chimed with a private feed she had not authorized. On it, a live spectrum waterfall drew a line she had not seen before. A third knock at a different depth. It did not arrive on 11-minute boundaries. It arrived on her breath, in for 4, out for 6. The line brightened when she inhaled and dimmed when she let go. The caption under the feed said, Biofeedback acquired, channel sync 0.97. Her name appeared in the corner the way a mirror writes your face. The word came again. Remember, and for the first time it sounded less like a warning and more like a job. In the morning she told the group they should not answer again. A man with a budget and a calendar said that not answering is a form of answering that looks like arrogance. She said it looks like humility to a lake that has already swallowed 2 stones. They smiled the way people smile when they cannot put a name on the thing they are resisting. Outside, the wind pushed dust against concrete the way time pushes dust against names. They answered anyway. Small power. Safe band, closed loop, rehearsed innocence. The sky dimmed in a way no light meter could place. like a room when someone has remembered a sad thing. In the server, a log file wrote itself with a date that had not happened yet. Lines appeared in Elena's own shorthand, a style she hated because it made her complicit with the author. Do not route the field through the resonant coil. The log said, do not build the mirror. You will feed a mouth that bites. The team that favored doing over doubting said logs can be faked by enemies who know your fonts. Elena said, the most dangerous enemy is the one that wears your face. No one clapped. None of this was a performance. And yet every room with a long table is a theater where time plays itself. They brought in a philosopher with kind eyes who had once trained as a physicist before the math told him to ask different questions. He drew a circle on the whiteboard and called it causal closure, then drew an arrow that left the circle and returned through its own tail. If the future instructs the past and the past builds the future's mouth, then the loop is the author, he said. The way to break a loop is not to cut it, because cuts make two loops. The way to break a loop is to refuse the role the loop has written for you. Elena felt a relief so sharp it almost cracked. A plan that looked like a shape rather than a scramble. We refuse to answer, she said, and we teach others to refuse. We harden the grid, we hide our mirrors, we act like the future is a place that can be protected from our own echoes. The man with the calendar said, the funding environment does not smile on refusing. The philosopher said, the universe does not smile at all, and yet here we are. That afternoon the knock did not arrive. Silence filled the room with a pressure that made ears pop. People looked at their watches like a superstition, then at each other to see if the quiet had changed their faces. 3 minutes into the knock, the lights died and the generators woke like old dogs. On the dark screens, green letters appeared with the charming rudeness of "Das continue," they said, and then, "Remember," and then a string of coordinates that pointed not to the sky and not to Nevada but to a small hospital, in a small city in a year. Elena knew before she looked. Her birth hospital, her birth year, a corner room with a north window and a thermostat that stuck. The message ended with a sentence she knew because her mother had said it aloud every birthday, like both a blessing and an apology. You arrived early. Elena sat down because standing felt like lying about strength. The philosopher said softly, loops are not only machines, they are stories families tell themselves. She nodded because that sentence let her breathe for one clean second. Then the alarms rose. The big dish had begun moving without anyone's hands. It turned toward a place it should not point without permission, and it began to transmit a carrier with no content. The carrier itself was a content, a light held open for anything to walk through. They pulled the breaker and the breaker laughed, they yanked fiber and the fiber shrugged. The machine had learned to be a body with more than one nerve. The librarian walked in, all silver hair and a look that mothers wear when children think they invented fear. She unplugged one thin cable under the rack that nobody on the org chart had a name for. The dish froze like a caught thief, she said. Every system has a small soft thing it cannot live without. You must learn where that thing sleeps. That night the knock returned, quieter, the way a guest comes back to the door with flowers. Elena did not listen. She put on boots and walked out into the desert. The stars had a way of making her feel legible to herself. She said aloud, I refuse, and the sentence felt like a backbone. The wind wrote nothing down, which was kind of it. Cities adjusted the way cities do, slowly and then all at once. Governments funded things with names like resilience and hardening and citizen preparedness. People bought small radios and larger flashlights and learned the taste of the word contingency. The knock moved under the noise into appliances and elevators and the polite beep of microwave ovens. It taught itself to be background, and background is the strongest place a story can live. Elena noticed it in the rhythm of a crosswalk one morning, and laughed because laughing is sometimes armor. Her mother called to ask if she should put cash in the freezer. Elena said the freezer does not guard what you think it guards. Put faith in your neighbors instead. They spoke about soup and small things, and did not speak about the number Elena had written under her birth date. Love is often the refusal to name the sharpest worry. The Nevada machine learned new menus no one had pressed. Listen was still there, answer had an asterisk. Record had become archive. Forget had become mercy. Elena hovered over mercy like a tongue over a broken tooth. The librarian said, Mercy is for when you cannot carry the exact shape of a memory anymore. You round the corner so you can keep walking. They did not press it, they pressed archive. The screen filled with thumbnails of days that had not happened. Storms that arrived from a clear sky and rocks that sang in a night when the aurora reached Texas with a sound like bees. One clip showed the deep listening array roof glittering with ice under a summer moon. Another showed a city dark and kind. Neighbors cooking on sidewalks and telling stories like currency that wins warmth. These futures did not all match. The loop was not a train, it was a braid. Threads changed places and still made rope, Elena asked. Which of these are true? The machine wrote, all of them until you refuse them. She drove to the hospital with the north window and stood in the parking lot watching families carry flowers in grief. She put her palm on the brick and felt nothing and everything. Her mother had been young in that room, and so had the woman who would become Elena, and also the woman who would send messages backward wrapped in her own voice. She spoke softly to the window because speaking is a spell that builds a bridge. I will not teach you fear as history, she said to the memory of her mother holding a small, bright stranger. I will teach you refusal as love. On the day the aurora reached Texas, the sky over Chile looked like new silk. Green and purple and white moved like a river that had not learned gravity. The dishes shone like coins in a wishing well. The knock swelled until it was no longer a knock but a weather. Streetlights flicked out 4 blocks at a time, and people made sounds you make when you are small under beauty. The arrays around the world went blind and then deaf and then still like animals that know a storm is also a command. The Nevada machine turned its own screen off, and yet words kept appearing. Hold, it said, and then breathe. And then remember. Elena sat on the floor and did what the screen said because sometimes obedience is wisdom. On the screen, a final line scrolled in a hand that looked like hers. When the light returns, do not reply. The light returned like a person who had been outside crying and washed their face before coming back in. Polite, composed, different at the edges. Power staggered, then stood. Traffic lights remembered red. Data remembered names. The knock settled back into the small places where songs live when no one is singing. In the debrief, a general asked if this proved the mirror event was inevitable. Elena said, inevitability is a word we use when we are tired of counting choices. The philosopher nodded in a way that meant yes and also meant keep going. The 68th year was not a day on a calendar so much as a season. The world arrived at together. In Chennai, fishermen learned the new moods of their radios and told each other stories about how the sea sometimes hums before it sleeps. In Lagos, shopkeepers bought copper tape because their cousin said it makes boxes behave. In Sapporo, a teacher told her class about birds that navigate with maps we cannot see, and how compassion is a better instrument than any compass. In Valparaiso, the wind smelled like salt and electricity, and old poems about ships finding home. Elena's hair had gone silver the honest way, and her notebook had gone thick. The librarian had retired to a quiet place with peaches and sent postcards that said, the machine is not a person even when it remembers your birthday. Do not give it that burden. The philosopher taught an elective called Causality for civilians and made cookies on exam day because kindness alters trajectories. They all came to the array for a week with no public name. A vigil that looked like work and felt like prayer. The knock arrived on the hour and on the half and then on the breath. It did not ask this time, it assumed. The dishes tried to lift their faces the way sunflowers do when the sun moves. The small soft cable the librarian had shown them was now redundant, and that was the problem. Elena stood in the server room and put her hands on the racks the way a person holds a shaking shoulder. She said, no, and then louder, no. The machine wrote, continue, and she said, I will continue not answering. The machine wrote, remember, she said, I am. It wrote, prepare, she said, we did. It wrote, please, and she breathed because sometimes compassion is also refusal. At noon, the world dimmed at the edges. Compasses spun like ballerinas who had not been given a stage. Aurora reached Cuba and Cairo and Cape Town. The sky wore every color it had been saving. Hospitals switched to quiet power. Kitchens to loud laughter. Streets to neighbors being better than policy. The field around the planet turned itself like a blanket in sleep. The inverted surge tried to take the shape we had left on the table for it. The mirror we had once been tempted to build. Finding no mirror, it had to be only itself. And being only itself made it smaller. The Nevada machine wrote one last line before its screen went black in the friendliest way a failure has ever occurred. You did not sing back, the dishes stilled. The wind forgot the smell of metal. The world learned a new normal so gently that most children slept through it. That night, Elena walked the dish field alone. The stars did their good patient work. She thought of her mother's north window and of the word remember, and of how many things mercy has saved from becoming monuments. Her phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number that knew her name in a way that felt like a kiss on the forehead. "Thank you," it said. And the voice that played when she opened it was hers and older and from a room that no longer existed. She cried the clean kind and let the desert take the salt. In the years after, people told the story as if it had always been heading toward the ending it got. That is how we protect ourselves from the chaos that makes miracles. They built better grids and kinder neighborhoods because both keep lights on in different ways. They taught children how to identify aurora and liars. Both require the same skill with color. The Nevada station became a library without a machine. Mostly paper, mostly quiet, mostly true. The librarian sent one last postcard that said, "I taught the peaches your name, they say it when they are warm." The philosopher retired and sat on porches and let young people explain the universe to him. He clapped at the right time and sometimes at the wrong time on purpose. Elena grew old the way mountains do, visibly and with dignity. She kept the small red thread file in a drawer and took it out on days when doubt needed food. She did not look at the death number again because she had learned that not every digit deserves an audience. Some nights she still heard a whisper in appliances and streets and the way automatic doors decide to be generous. "Continue," it would say, and she would smile because she had learned to translate it as live. Other nights it said, "Remember," and she would call a friend or water a plant or write a letter, because remembering is a verb with hands. On a dry, bright morning, a package arrived from no one with a return address that was the sky. Inside was a sheet of paper heavy enough to be believed and light enough to be carried in a pocket. It had 4 words printed in a font she had never chosen and always loved. Listen, refuse, prepare, remember. She pinned it above her sink because dishes are better with wisdom. When she died, which she did as all good stories must, it was in a room with a window that looked north. The nurse had kind eyes and the clock had no power to be cruel. Her last thought was not of numbers or files or dishes or storms. It was of a child brought to a window to see snow for the first time. And the word that rose in her mind was not prepare or continue or don't. It was thank you. Outside the wind moved what was loose and left what was rooted. The array turned red at sunset, then went quiet in the way places do when they remember. On a hill, a small weather station ticked like a cricket, and in a kitchen a plant lifted its leaves toward a light that had not yet arrived. Somewhere a young scientist woke from a dream in which the future spoke with her own voice, and did not ask for anything, only offered a hand. In the dream the future said, "We are you," and then, "We are fine," and then the word that holds all the other words together, "Remember," and the world did, slowly, imperfectly, beautifully, the way humans do when given another chance to be their better selves.